All right, good afternoon. Usually, me using a microphone in a small setting, I've got such a loud voice, I usually don't do it, but we're doing this for all of our friends that are joining on Facebook via Facebook Live. We're also going to be recording this event and also having clips that we can use later. So I will be using the microphone. These guys are mic'd, and when I go around and we have Q&A, I'll also ask you to speak into the microphone and introduce yourself, and so we can have a good recording. I've met many of you, but for those who I haven't met, my name is Michael Goldberg. I am the executive director of our new Veale Institute for Entrepreneurship, which is housed right here in ThinkBox. It's great to see. Let me just see a show of hands. How many of you, this is your first time at ThinkBox? All right, so some of you will welcome. This is our entrepreneurship floor, where a lot of our activity and startups are housed, and it's great to have you here. It's such an honor to welcome Joe Mandato, my friend and mentor, back to campus. It was funny. I was joking with him. I had the privilege. Well, it's funny. I had the privilege. I had the privilege earlier of being in a board meeting. Joe's a member of our board of trustees, and I was looking for some like laugh lines with this not very laughy group. So I was like, oh, we have this new awesome program where we're inviting alums to come back and speak on campus. And we kicked it off with Mike Fisher about 2 weeks ago. We had Hallie Tecco last week. And then I said to this group, I was like, well, tonight we were like really kind of struggling to find someone. We were sort of slumming. So I asked, your colleague Joe to come. And Joe laughed, thank God. Like the rest of the room, it was like sort of like muffled laughter. I was like, okay. It's like, I'm kidding. He's my friend. Joe is a 2004 graduate of our Doctorate of Management program. We'll talk tonight, obviously, with Harry about his career in venture capital and his sort of path. He's been a great friend and mentor, board member for a number of years here, a donor to our floor. After this, we all need to go cram into the Joe Mandato office, which is great. And a number of us, including Harry and Sasong and Emily, were out in San Francisco, and Todd were out in San Francisco, where Joe makes his home in the fall. And he was so kind and spent actually the day with us, sort of schlepping around to Slack and other companies, which was great. So it's always wonderful to welcome him back on campus. He does work at a number of different campuses, including Stanford and Harvard and other places. So when we get him here, I always want to make sure that he hangs with case students. And Harry Grubman, who's one of our great case students, undergraduate, sophomore, is going to moderate the discussion. So welcome, Joe, and welcome, Harry.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're honored to have Joe Mandato here today. I'll introduce myself a bit. I'm Harry Grubman. I'm a second year in electrical engineering and computer science. So the way this is going to work is I'll start by asking a few questions. And if you have questions throughout, we'll try and get your questions in. I think
I'll hold the mic. I'll be holding the microphone.
Mike will have the microphone, so just let him know that you have a question. And we'll go from there. So my first question for you, Joe. You have a variety of experience. Mm-hmm. You worked in the military. You were a founder. You're now in venture capital. What would you say are skills that remained essential throughout all these experiences? And what changed? What surprised you?
Sure. So just by way of background, let me give you a little background. So I did spend, my life is kind of in 3 or 4 buckets, right? The first being 4.5 years in the military. I was a captain in the Army, and I was in the Medical Service Corps. And my assignment, I was an aide-de-camp to a major general, and the major general was in charge of all U.S. military medical facilities in Southeast Asia, and then Walter Reed Army Medical Center. So I was a pretty young person. He was a major general, a 2-star general, but he also was a thoracic surgeon. So he liked doing that better than administering a 1,200-bed military hospital. So Joe got to have a series of experiences that were way beyond his skill set, way beyond his age, but it was the most extraordinary experience I've ever had in my life. And what came out of that was, you're usually better than you think you are, right? Your capabilities far exceed your own self-assessment of what your capabilities are, and certainly of your confidence. And that's a good thing. And I think the sooner you realize that, the better. From there, I knew I wanted to stay in healthcare, but I didn't want to stay in the Army. And I couldn't get into medical school. I didn't apply because I knew self-awareness is a very important thing. I couldn't get into medical school, but I could go into the healthcare business in that it's a $1 trillion industry in the United States. There aren't many $1 trillion industries in the world. And it gives you an opportunity to make an impact, but also to make a good living, right? And so I started out as an entrepreneur, and I had essentially I had run 5 different companies as a CEO or founder, and in 5 different medical specialties. Okay, let's go back to that. Your confidence usually is not as good as your ability or your self-awareness, right? So 5 different medical specialties, and the one thing so many of you, the younger people, and I'm surprised there's so many less young people here, right? So I have to be on my game. For the younger people, I think you're great athletes. You do whatever you do it well, right? And the same would be true in your choice of businesses or profession, whatever else. You will do a good job of it. And if there are opportunities out there that engage some risk, involve some risk, take it, right? Take it. I think it's well worth it. There's no better way to learn. So I spent a number of years running these companies. And then I got into the investment world as a venture capitalist. Myself and several other fellows formed a venture fund. It was a series of 3 funds called De Novo Ventures. And in venture, each fund has a 10-year life, right? So you have to make a commitment to be around for 10 years. And so we were all demographically challenged. So at the end of this current fund, we're not going to raise another fund. We're just going to manage whatever assets we have left. And in the course of these years, I was also I continue as a teacher at Stanford. I teach the class Medical Device Innovation, which is an undergraduate class, an engineering class. And it's for 15 years now. And it's been an extraordinary experience, right? I mean, the kids are extraordinary, as you are. And out of it has come some really interesting things. For example, one class, after class, 2 students came up and asked my opinion of their idea. And their idea was there has to be a better way to move teeth than with metal. Ugly, raw, painful metal. And would I help them? Well, that became Invisalign, right? And so these 2 students who had never had any experience doing what they intended to do went out on a limb to try to do it. One was an investment banker, so he had nothing to contribute. The second was an environmentalist, and her dad was a U.S. senator. She was a much more rational person, right? She had her feet very firmly planted on the ground. But to have had that experience with these 2 young students was kind of extraordinary. But more importantly, to see what the result was, because this opportunity involved computer science skills, developing mathematical models to determine how much force is necessary to move teeth, under which pressure, blah, blah, blah. I mean, really complicated stuff. And it took a long time, and it took a barrel full of money, but it became Invisalign. And Invisalign last year had a market cap of $22 billion. Neither one of the founders is involved. But I mean, that's nuts. Another interesting company that came out of this experience was a company called Intuitive Surgical. They developed the Da Vinci robot. Now, as a venture capitalist, you have all these criteria you use to determine what is potentially a good investment and what is not. Intuitive Surgical made no sense whatsoever on so many levels, right? It made no sense because it was extremely complicated. There are, on the bill of materials, 3,300 parts in the bill of materials. That's really a complicated piece of machinery. And when you think about it, you're doing surgery, and a software platform is driving that surgery, right? How do you get FDA approval? How do you figure out if this thing is safe and efficacious? Well, it's very complicated. They somehow got FDA approval. And the other challenge they had, and so I was an advisor to the firm, and I was an early investor. The other challenge they had is talking to a physician, doc, instead of this $25 scalpel, I want you to spend $1 million on a robot, right? That's not, I mean, that's a very difficult value proposition. So how'd they sell the first one? Well, there was a hospital in Syracuse, New York, and the Intuitive people went to visit, and they said, look, this is such a differentiator. I mean, it's such a disruptive product. If it works, this could be exciting. So they bought one, and they put a billboard up on the highway that runs through Syracuse, New York. If you're having prostatic surgery, ask your doctor, is he doing robotically? Or is he using his hand, right? All of a sudden, the hospital across the street, they had to have one too. So all of a sudden, Intuitive was getting people to buy it instead of using their $25 scalpel. And the head of urology at Johns Hopkins, who was a board member here at Case, I sat down with him. I said, would you ever consider using it? He said, that's criminal. That's insane. I would never, ever do that on a patient. And I gave him a laser pointer, and I told him to point it at the wall. And you saw this little red dot going like this from the laser pointer. What does that mean? It means that mortals, when they get to be in their 70s, shake, all right? They have a tremor. And when you're doing prostatic surgery or any other sensitive surgery, that little tremor could nick the wrong thing, right? If you look throughout the world, robotics are used in most any major industry where you have tight tolerances, repeatability, blah, 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 blah. All of a sudden, Intuitive Surgical was born, right? And today, if you look, so the price of our shares was 25 cents, and today the price is $610. The market cap of that company is like $40 billion. It's insane. It's insane. And it's the future of surgery, which is what ThinkBox is all about. It's the future of surgery. Okay. And so we were on my first bucket. The second bucket was being an entrepreneur, and the third bucket was as an investor. And that's where I am today.
And so when you're looking at different investments, we heard from another alum, Anand Swaminathan, who was saying that when he's looking, he's really focusing on the people.
Right.
What is it that you look for?
Right. So if I were to, I've got actually a presentation we could do someday, and it has about 10 or 15 variables. And number one on the list is the team, right? Who is going to lead this company to the promised land? Who is going to generate a return on my invested capital? And it's the people that are visiting with you. And you look at these people, you look at their experience, and it doesn't matter, if they've had a bunch of experience doing what they are doing. It's who they are, what they've done with whatever they have been involved with, and how well they do it. And the team around them, right? And in the case of Invisalign, what they had, besides not having the technical stuff, they had extraordinary passion. They were so passionate about what they were trying to do and how they believed in it. And nothing was going to hold them back. That was their contribution. And it was a big contribution, right? In the case of Intuitive, we were able to find who we think the only person in the universe that actually could have pulled that off, right? When the company was initially financed, the company I was running, a company called Origin Med Systems, minimally invasive surgery through small holes. We were bought while we were at Stanford Research Institute acquiring the license for all the non-military applications for the Da Vinci robot. And we then were acquired by Eli Lilly and Company, and they told us that robotics was not in their core vision for the future. All right, so we had to spin it out and get into, financing from somebody else. But it was the team at the end of the only person in the world that could have done it. He was extraordinary, and he was extraordinary. He had discipline, he had focus, and out there, as you've seen, you've got a lot of young people trying to do things, right? There's not a whole lot of wizened, experienced seers. They're young people, and which was fabulous for the energy and everything else. But there's got to be an adult in the room, and this person was the adult in the room. And that discipline actually got them to where they are today. So.
And with the Da Vinci robot and most of your work in life sciences, it's a very heavily regulated field.
Right.
How much do you focus on, shifting political climates, and how much is it just we put the best technology out there that we can?
Yeah, I think you'll see people just want to put the best technology they can possibly put out there, and there's always a way. There's always a way. We've been through so many things economically and regulatory-wise, et cetera, et cetera. So those shifting sands are something you just have to deal with, right? It should not stand in the way of the vision, the mission.
Shifting more to earlier experiences that you think put you in a great position. As a student, we're trying to figure out what's the best path to create something amazing, or to get into a position to do such. Mm-hmm. What experiences in your life would you say were most transformative, or most enabled you to do what you have done?
So at the end of the day, so I was the first in my extended family to go to college, and I borrowed $10 from Charlie Cardillo in order to apply to one college. And so at the end of that experience, my tolerance for risk was very high. I figured the only thing I had to worry about was whether I was going to eat tonight, right? So I could afford to take a lot of risk. And I think that willingness to take risk and being a very driven kind of person and not accepting no for an answer, I think those were key drivers in my own personal experience. And the other one was you don't take yourself too seriously, right?
Right.
There's a lot of smart people in the world. And you'll find in your experience, there's always several that insist on being the smartest in the room. There's no point to that, right? There's no point to that. A little humility and not taking yourself too seriously is really critical. And empathy. How did you define empathy? Right? What would you say empathy is? Anybody else?
Sincerity and compassion for someone else's.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about any relationship you have, any negotiation you've had, you are so far better off if you understand the motivation of the person across from you. That gives you such an advantage. It really, really, really does. And it also, I think it also takes the tension out of the experience as well. So that's a long-winded answer to your question, but those kinds of things, you'll notice I didn't mention any technical expertise, right? None whatsoever. It's just the person you are, and your passion and your unwillingness to take no for an answer. I think those are the biggest drivers.
So we're going to open it up to the floor. If anyone has any questions right now, feel free to let Michael with the mic know. We have a question back there.
Right. Just please introduce yourself for Joe.
Hey, Joe. My name is Alvin. I'm a scientist here. What invention do you think that you'll see in your lifetime? That you hope to see in your lifetime?
Whoa. So that's a tough one, right? So I think the invention that I've been impressed with the most is a company called Accuray, where it's highly focused energy to treat solid state tumors without surgery, right? And brain tumors for the most part. And it's having a very difficult time kind of getting off the ground. And when you think about that, if you or your family members had an option of not having brain surgery, by laying there without an anesthetic and having this highly focused energy go in there and kill your tumor, that's awesome. If I could have anything to do with that, that would be kind of like the cause, the sacred mission, right? That would be something really, really critical. The other one, getting rid of this metal in orthodontia, right? That's not as noble as Accuray, but still, it affects so many young people. The docs charge a barrel of money for it. It takes forever, and it's painful and unsanitary and everything else. And there are options out there, right? And so how do you drive those? I think one of the things in healthcare, when you come up with something truly disruptive being it's going to change the practice, right? You'll find clinicians are very reluctant to change practice, all right? They've been trained in a very linear kind of way, and they make treatment decisions based on their little algorithm, right? So if you come in there and say, forget everything you've learned, that's a challenge. That's a real challenge. With the robot, it was a real challenge. With orthodontics, it was a real challenge. And they'll come at you and say, well, you don't have clinical data. You haven't proven safety and efficacy. It's much too expensive. What does that mean? What does it mean it's much too expensive? What's your frame of reference, right? Why is it too expensive? So all these objections, and it's exhausting. So physician, doctor, the incision for gallbladder surgery has gone from 6 inches to 10 millimeters. Why do you need clinical data, or at least a whole lot of clinical data, right? It makes all the sense in the world. Are there any physicians in the room? Right? So it's exhausting when the truth is so obvious, right? And you've just got to keep pushing. And so that too is a long-winded answer. What are you seeing? What do you think is pretty dramatic?
Oh, what do I see?
Yeah.
Dramatic? I'm interested in what Elon is doing with the Neuralink. How he's trying to, somewhat futuristically store memories and, restore vision loss.
Oh, yeah. So yeah, they've got an artificial retina, and that's been around for a long time. That, anything for the eye takes an extraordinarily long time. The FDA has said if there's anything that's invasive to the eye, you need 200 patients, 200 eyes for 2-year follow-up, right? And so it takes forever. And yet, one company I led is a company called Ioptics Research, and we were the 12th entrant into the intraocular lens market, right? When you get old, you get a cataract, you take it out, and you replace it with a 6-millimeter piece of polymethyl methacrylate. Pretty extraordinary. But again, the first doctor that used it in Los Angeles was arrested. The police were notified by his medical society that it was malpractice. He was hurting patients. There was no data to support it, but again, it's this thing about change, and you've got to be unwilling to accept those really weak excuses in just about any environment, right? Doesn't need to be healthcare, just about any environment. Why are there always barriers, right? Why do people create barriers? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't go anywhere, right? So,
Joe, I'd like you to, you mentioned $1 trillion industry and 17% of the economy.
right.
And can you help us with it? People agonize about this a lot and, the cost of healthcare and
Right.
what's expensive.
Mm-hmm.
I was reminded a few weeks ago that in the early 1900s, we spent 50 cents out of our dollar on food and clothing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right? Now we're a much more prosperous society, so we have more money to spend on healthcare. Is it inevitable that we will want to spend, as we become more prosperous, we will want to spend more because we want to live well, right? We want to live and we want to live well.
So my mom, who was 99 at the time, her copay for an important pharmaceutical that she was taking went from $10 to $15. She was up in arms. Ma, what are you thinking of? It costs something to make this stuff, right? I think we've been spoiled in that we all expect our health care to be taken care of. And it just doesn't work that way, number one. Number two, when you think about this extraordinary expense when they identify healthcare, 40% of it is waste, repeated tests. I mean, it's the most inefficient system in the world. There's no market drivers, right? You've got third parties paying all these expenses based on reasonable cost. Why does no docs? Why does an orthopod have to make 20 grand to do a hip or a knee, right? With that person, or an orthodontist, the metal that they buy for your case costs $100. They charge $5,000. There's no relationship there, and yet people pay it, right? So sure, it is expensive, but what's more important than your health? Number one. And number two, why can't they attack it systemically? I had a procedure, a relatively minor, no, it wasn't, I guess. I got a bill for $262,000. And on your cell phone bill, it breaks it down into these 20 components, $1.50 for this, $2. There was one line item, medical supplies, 50 grand.
Nice.
Medical supplies.
I wish I could write invoices.
No, I mean, life is good. Life is good. So I think they've got to attack the inefficiencies. I really think they have to attack the inefficiencies. The device companies, the cost of 14 cents of every healthcare dollar, perhaps, are devices. That's pretty modest. 40% of these administrative costs and the repeated test and the incorrect test, and fee for service. Right? So I have a cold. I go see the doc, pay him, come out, go see the doc because the cold doesn't go away. Go to a different doc, go see her. She tries something, it doesn't work. Everybody's getting paid for the same problem. That doesn't work in any other business, does it?
Isn't every other business going to pay for performance, right?
Yeah.
I want to pay you for an outcome.
Right.
How do we get there?
Exactly. Well, somebody's got to legislate it, right? Okay. Somebody's got to legislate. Somebody's got to say, for the primary care physicians, you've all got to go at risk. All right. If you want to deal with this population, you've got to go at risk. And you've got to force change, right? And there's got to be market drivers. You cannot fix prices. Getting an MRI in Palo Alto, there are about a dozen MRI centers in Palo Alto, right? Everyone charges the same price, $1,800 for an MRI. Why is that? If I've got an MRI center and I've got gaps between reads, right? Why wouldn't I offer all the PCPs, a huge discount? So
Joe's
I fill up.
MRI
No.
doesn't sound like Joe's discount tires.
Right?
This is just not as attractive.
Why should everyone charge $1,800? Right? It doesn't make any sense. So you asked the question about what do you consider important, right, when evaluating something. So obviously the management team. And in the case of Invisalign, I described it as a pretty weak management team, right? And what was worse was their level of self-awareness was fairly modest. And so the founder came into a board meeting one day and he said, I'm proud to announce that we opened our factory in Pakistan and we have 500 employees. Zia, you're supposed to say that before you go to a board meeting. You're supposed to ask your board, right? Blah, blah, blah. So it went on and on and on. So clearly the management team was not what it needed to be. In the case of Intuitive, I described Lonnie Smith as being one of the great managers of all time. There was a third startup, and I describe it. And we were fortunate in being able to invest in Facebook pretty early on. And you had Zuckerberg, right, 24, 25-year-old kid, college dropout. What did he do that the other people did not do? What did he do in terms of being self-aware, knowing what his own knowledge gaps were, to cover his tail? He did something I thought was pretty extraordinary. He hired Sheryl Sandberg, right? And she could have had any job in the Valley, right? And one day she went home. She said to her spouse at the time, I'm going to leave what I'm doing. I know I can take any job in Silicon Valley. I'm going to be the number 2 person at Facebook, and my boss is a 25-year-old college dropout, right? She had vision. He had, I thought, extraordinary vision for a young guy. He's a pretty arrogant young guy. I guess he can afford to be. But still, I thought that was quite extraordinary for him to do that. And I think it really saved his business, and it allowed him to really focus on the stuff that he did best. But when you consider some of the things about making the investment, in the healthcare world, we're always talking intellectual property, right? Tell me about the patents, tell me about the portfolio. If you look at Invisalign, extraordinary intellectual property, right? If you look at Intuitive, I mean, through the roof intellectual property. It's really staggering. At Facebook, was there any intellectual property? Right. Besides that, there was already a company that was in the business, right? What company was that?
Friendster.
Yeah, MySpace, yeah, right? Those are the same people that have AOL Gmails, right? Yeah. And the third thing, their business model, they gave away the product free. Wow, right? So if you were evaluating those 3 companies, which would you think to be the best investment? You're nodding your head. Go ahead. What? Huh?
Intuitive.
I already gave you. That's right. I gave you the market cap number. So how many would say Intuitive? Reasonable. What about Invisalign? Anybody for Invisalign? Good. And what about Facebook? A distant third? So I do this exercise with my Stanford students, right? And they invariably, and I go through a long list, and we talk about all the variables. I go through the long list, and they do it the same way. They evaluate them and come to the same conclusion. And it's literally in reverse order to what it actually is, right? Facebook has a market cap of $60, $70 billion, I think. I mean, it's just massive. It now, and so what motivated us? Okay, no intellectual property, didn't charge anything. What motivated us? More people were using it every month. A lot more people were using it. It was only a matter of time before they figured out something they could sell, right? It would be only, and if they could figure that product out, and their user base is 2 billion, the population of China, right? That's going to be a huge company. And that's exactly what happened. But it's really interesting. So there was something there. The number of users and the user growth month by month by month. There's got to be something they can figure out they can sell them. And look what's happened today, right? 2 billion users, and they're still growing. They're still growing. I think their revenues last year were $36 billion, right? So that one would not ordinarily have passed venture muster, right? Or it would have been, everyone listed it as number 3 in terms of the attractiveness. So you never know, right? And it wasn't disruptive, right? What was it? It was a communication tool for socially uncomfortable guys to meet women at Harvard, right? I mean, it was really fundamental, right? Oh. Who would have thunk? But in any event, any other questions?
Yes, on the flip side of that, you've had a wildly successful investing career, but part of VC investing is failure.
Yeah.
You just sort of have to accept that.
No.
Can you give a couple stories of
Totally.
companies you were compelled to invest in, but just were sort of big failures?
Right. Yeah. Let me think. Give me some time. I got to think about that. So we have one who should remain nameless, but this is an extraordinary product that lots and lots of people are using, and it's in the diabetic space, which is a really capital-intensive space, but it's such an important product. It's for type 2 diabetics, and it's a pump. You wear it, it detects glucose levels, and then it will give you insulin. And the venture community won't finance it, right? And that's a tragedy. It won't finance it. So, I think venture has a responsibility, right? They have to look at things like that a little differently and perhaps put aside some of their bias and put aside some of their return models, right? Because the impact on society is so great. And type 2s, there's a certain demographic that are type 2s. And compliance is a big issue. Compliance is a really big issue. So if you've got this, you don't have to worry about compliance anymore. They won't finance it. And it just drives you nuts. And there's no other source. There's no kind of emergency fund because hundreds of thousands of patients are not going to have this tomorrow. The other bad news is the manufacturing is done in China, right? So all of a sudden the factory closed down for longer than expected. So that's going to be a failure, right? And that's a shame. Coincidentally, several years ago, we had another company with a type 1 pump, and we couldn't raise money again. But again, it was so easy for the patient, so easy for the patient, and we were growing at 30-40% a quarter, right? So the customers were out there, but we needed like $50 million, right, to have enough capacity in the field and also to have enough capacity to manufacture at very low cost, and we couldn't raise it, and they had to close it, and the management team was extraordinary. They were phenomenal. Is that enough failures?
Well, there's also the bit of investments you regret not making. Is there one or two that you looked at and?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. I think part of venture is having some degree of discipline, right? And what you don't want to do is you can't chase an investment, right? You can't chase an investment. You can't throw money at it. That's just not good behavior, and you increase your risk exponentially, right? And so there have been a couple of situations in healthcare service world where we were shut out, and just because of the pricing, we wouldn't run after it. But the other thing you learn our differentiator, by the way, in the venture business when we raised this money, we had all been entrepreneurs. We had all been CEOs of companies. So we understood the challenges an entrepreneur would have. That was our value add. That was our differentiator. We really felt we were a value add investor, right? Whereas a lot of the traditional firms, they all call it, we're a value add. We have a Rolodex, right? That's terrific. You have a Rolodex. We could help them get through real crises, right? And that served us very well. So we had tons of deal flow. That was never an issue. And the other thing you learn is there's always another deal. There's always another deal, which is cool. That takes a while to figure out, though, right? So.
Hi, Joe.
Hi.
So I was
Introduce yourself.
Oh, hi. I'm Famida. I don't really know how to introduce myself at this point. I am an adjunct faculty at Case. I am also working right now with the researcher here at Case on one of the technologies that he's building out. So I was going to continue what you started talking about. Companies not getting investments, right? And now we are hearing more and more that Silicon Valley investors won't invest unless they think it's a unicorn.
Yeah. They go through phases.
So do you think the VC industry is about to be disrupted?
No. I think it could very well be disruptive. I think it would be easy, if you had the money, it would be easy to disrupt. No question about it. They're very formulaic. If you remember in 2008, 2009, when the economy was really hurting, the public market was not a good alternative. So the only source of cash for startups was venture funds. And all of a sudden, they lost their venture fund kind of positioning. They were now later stage growth equity, right? They literally abandoned their primary market. And that's where I think some responsibility, there has to be some accountability for that, right? So to your point, I don't think relative to healthcare, you need to be a unicorn, because unicorns in healthcare are few and far between, right? And I think you see now that a lot of that luster has been worn off, right? Where people, talk about a unicorn, it just doesn't make sense. So people are being more disciplined, I think, when evaluating different opportunities. And when you evaluated WeWork, I mean, it was a real estate company. It was did you see some of the stuff this guy invested in? The guy was off the wall. He was off the wall. So why would you invest in somebody like that? And then, what was the big investor in Japan? SoftBank. SoftBank invested $200 million, right? They should have told the founder, this is the way we're going to do business. If you don't want our money, don't take it. But if you take our money, we insist. What's the risk of doing that? $200 million, right? Please do this. It's not asking very much. That's it. So I think the whole unicorn phenomenon has changed somewhat, and it's very much a pyramid now. Very, very few, I think, get that valuation early on, and they've got to prove themselves.
Hey, Joe.
Hi.
My name is Wayne Hawthorne. I work in the technology transfer office here in Case.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to get a little bit in the weeds a little bit and
Okay.
ask you about AI. We have a lot of AI technologies here in Case, ranging from medical to agricultural, et cetera, et cetera. What's your general philosophy about AI, and is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Or what are your thoughts?
No, I think it's potentially an extraordinary thing. To your question earlier, this should have come up. It's an extraordinary thing, right? So again, going to the intuitive model where you've got the human hand. In the case of AI, you've got a radiologist looking at an image and trying to determine the pathologies in those images. With AI, you're at least as good as, if not better, than the physician, right, in determining pathologies. That's pretty interesting, don't you think? And now, I mean, it's used on a pretty regular basis. So I think it has a huge potential. Huge potential. Don't you?
Yeah, I do. Let me talk to you a little bit about it offline.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Hi, Joe.
Hi.
Arnold Huffman. 93 grad, alumni board president right now. So,
very good.
But back to your question, it sounds like very formulaic. Have you ever made an investment off of that based on gut or emotion that has worked out?
Yeah, Facebook.
Yeah, okay.
Facebook. Total gut. Yeah, none of the objective criteria made sense.
So why'd you do it?
Yeah,
Well, with that many users, if they come up with end of price, $1.58 a share, if they come up with something, that's going to be a great investment, right? That's an important criteria, the disruptive nature of whatever you're evaluating. We don't like incrementalist, right? I mean, 10% better than the industry standard, we're not interested in that. We want something truly disruptive. The brace thing, even though they didn't have the skill set to get it done, braces haven't changed since day one. This would, if they could pull it off, would be so disruptive. And it was. Intuitive, robotics, and surgery. If they could pull it off, it would be so disruptive. So there's always an element of gut in all of those. But Facebook probably was the most.
Yes, Greg Archer. I'm a guest here. And so what is your opinion as technologies converge with regen medicine coming in now and, regulation the way it is and so many different players in the market? How do you see that unfolding in, the next 3 to 5 years?
So when you say the first one was regional,
Like stem cell.
oh right.
biologics,
Okay,
regenerative medicine.
Oh yeah, no. All of that is going and growing by leaps and bounds. The challenge you've got is, efficacy. Will it do what it's intended to do, right? Because so many cancer therapies. If you evaluate the market and the players in cancer therapy, there's thousands, right? They can't all succeed. And the other thing is, everyone has these Nobel this and King Kong that. They're a dime a dozen, right? I mean, it's really, really hilarious. I mean, where everyone is so extraordinary and esteemed and published, blah, 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 blah. But you get to be somewhat cynical because they're all that way, right? So which ones do you decide to fund? And the other challenge from a personal standpoint, remember how I told you that my partners and I were all demographically challenged, so we don't want to make any more 10-year commitments? What if you're running a biotech? Okay, what if you took a job as CEO of a biotech, and at the end of 10 years, the science didn't work? Boy, that would be disappointing, right? And so I think, you've got to evaluate and be very careful. I'd invest in one of those ETFs of biotech firms, right? I mean, you've got to mitigate your risk somehow. I think taking individual risk is really a tough one in the biotech world. So, but all those therapies you mentioned are all very important, and they will continue to grow and prosper, no question.
Because it seems like, there's so many different players, it's hard to determine which is going to provide the efficacy that you're looking for.
Right.
So do you see leaders emerging, whether it's from big pharma, whether it's from certain, funding that comes from NHI or universities?
Right. I think the big pharma investments are probably the biggest predictor of potential success, right? Universities, with all due respect, one of the challenges with university technology and science and technology transfer is there are very few filters, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, right? I mean, if a professor wants to do some research, she is going to do it. And you could have a venture fund here and look at stuff, and you're not going to say no to a lot of the people that come at you, right? You've got to have that arm's length ability to say no, or you've got to shut down. It just doesn't make good sense, economic sense. And in the case of the university setting, economics are not that critical in the evaluation process, right? Management is not that critical in the evaluation process. Potential outcome and timeline are not that critical in the evaluation process. In fact, time is irrelevant, right? The university will be here forever, so it doesn't matter. So there's huge inefficiencies on the part of university setting. Right. On the other hand, they produce lots of good stuff. And we've got a lot of data to support that in our own work here, right? Hunter Peckham, right, the stuff that he's done. I mean, there's a lot of good scientists there that have done great work.
I'm Chuck. I'm a grad student here.
And what, Chuck?
Chemical engineering.
Very good.
Thanks. And I'm just wondering, how long does it usually take when you first meet a team or management before you decide you can trust them and invest in that?
I think it's pretty quick, actually. Again, perhaps one of the few advantages of age and experience, right? You know it when you see it, right? So you can get through that evaluation process pretty quickly, I think. When I was looking for venture money, I was always frustrated because you couldn't get answers from the venture community. They would drag on the process like forever, right? And that was really disappointing. And I think that's also unfair to entrepreneurs, right? So when you're looking at VCs, you really got to evaluate who they are. Are those the people you want to do business with, right? You want to take their money, right? And are they good to work with? Do they stick with you, right? There's all kinds of variables you need. You're evaluating them as a partner. Obviously, the money makes it a lot easier to get over the hump, but still, these are the people you're going to be working with for years. Do you want to work with them? Do you like them? Do you respect them? Will you learn something from them? Will they stick with you over time? So it's a mutual process. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hi. So
Hi.
first of all, thanks for being here.
Thank you
Kind of
very
have a broader question. So you've raised some really cool points about the venture community as a whole and how they play a big role in which companies grow and which advance and which don't.
Mm-hmm.
And then also their main objective is, of course, return on investment.
Right.
But I was also wondering about the impact on society.
Right.
So what power or how much, I guess, moral, ethical implications go into making those decisions? Because thinking about like Facebook as a use case, they have been tremendously successful, but they've also
that's not fair.
they've also spawned a lot of discussions about
Right.
privacy and what that means.
Right.
So how do you strike a balance where you are still, profiting, but society profit and culture profits too?
Sure. But you know, in the case of the type 2 and type 1 product, right? Clearly, there was a social implication for that, and that was very important for us, right? We knew it was to make money was going to be like a real long shot, given the fact that they needed $50 million more after investing $70 million. I mean, that's you're not going to make a return. But if you can help the people that needed help, the impact is extraordinary. The impact is extraordinary, and that's a return on investment that's infinite almost, right? So to answer your question, it varies. We were in a position where we could afford to do that and not worry so much about it. Some of the venture firms, one of the real other concerns I have, these are young people that have had pretty good lives, right? And they want to make a barrel of money before they're 30, right? And they don't have any empathy. They really don't have, they could care less. It's really awful. And that's where I go to, you have to evaluate these people as well, right? So I think the industry is a cottage industry. It hasn't been around that long, right? And there's been more money. I'm on the investment committee here. I mean, the list, we're hanging out by their door because they won't let us invest. What? They won't let us give them money, right? I mean, it's hilarious. There's so many venture firms and there's so many institutions throwing money at them, right? All the pension funds in America throwing money at them. University endowments are throwing money at them. So they have access to tons of capital. And there's not a whole lot of behavioral requirements when they throw money at you, right? But your point is a good one, and I think that too is something you would see when you're evaluating a venture firm.
We have time for one more question. All right, Emily, go for it.
Go for it.
I guess my question is kind of related to the songs, but more healthcare specific, because obviously a lot of these startups and different developments like regenerative medicine are more acute treatment for actual problems, and that leads to a lot of inefficiencies in the healthcare system, whereas preventative medicine is starting to come on the upswing. So I was wondering, do you see the industry moving in that direction, and what can like VC firms and other people in the industry do to make that change happen?
Right. So if you look at the whole system, preventive care is not part of the equation, or it's a small part of the equation, or it's as long as fee-for-service exists, what do they care about preventive care, right? Talk about ethics. Geez, go to the provider organizations, right? Why do they have to keep merging? Why, if you need to find something at the Cleveland Clinic, good luck. Take a roadmap, hire a guide. I mean, it's unbelievable. Or if you're an elderly person, again, going back to my mom, so Boston on, Lansdowne Street? There's a street in Boston where every major medical center is represented, right? And they keep merging and building bigger buildings and bigger medical centers, bigger inefficiencies, huge customer dissatisfaction, right? And when you talk about the need for empathy, right? I walk into the medical center because I have a problem. I'm not going there because I like being part of the matter. I have a problem, so I'm already down. And the first person you meet, some clerk, treats you like dog meat. I mean, it's just mean, right? And then you go on through the equation, and the same thing happens over and over and over again. And that's just not, when you have that high level of customer patient dissatisfaction, in every other industry, you'd be out of business. Healthcare? No. The market forces aren't at work and you need those market forces at work. Going back to the MRI center, right? In terms of preventive care, I think you have PCP, primary care physicians, now being reimbursed, right? I got a note saying that my plan will now cover my annual physical and eyeglasses, and so kinds of things that are really important, because the comorbidities, right? If you can't see, you fall downstairs, right? You get hit by a car, blah, blah, blah. The economics are really easy to justify, but it's taken hundreds of years. Why is that? Why is that, right? Again, it's all about the market forces. They're absent from this equation, which is unfortunate. But preventive care is an important piece of the puzzle and is getting much more attention. But when I say much more, I mean, it barely registers on the Richter scale, right? I mean, it just barely registers. So.
Well, that was a fast hour.
That was depends on where you were sitting.
Exactly.
Right?
Well, Joe, thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome
For joining us. It is always such a pleasure to see you engage with our students and our community, and it's great. And Harry, thank you so much for moderating.
Thanks, Harry.
Our next session, actually, you almost teed it up well, and unfortunately, it's not going to be on Facebook Live, but Tim Milanich, your friend, our Chief Investment Officer, and Stefan Strine, who's the Chief Investment Officer of the Cleveland Clinic, on Monday at 4:30, you're going to talk about issues, exactly what you're facing. How do institutions think about venture capital and accessing venture capital and the challenges?
Right.
Tim often calls it, it's an access class, not an asset class. It's not so easy to get in.
Right.
But thank you so much.
Oh, no, thank you. This is really
great.
And it's very nice to see you. Very nice to see our friends in San Francisco.
Very good. All right.
Thank you. Thank you very much.